Welcome. In this video we will begin the Second World War with the 1939 invasion of Poland. In this video we'll look at the 1939 campaign as well as 1940. Last time we looked at how Nazi Germany had annexed Austria in the Anschluss, demanded the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia, and finally broken their Munich Pact and taken the remainder of Rump Czechoslovakia. Next, Hitler made a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union in 1939, shocking the world. In later 1939, Hitler makes a demand of Poland that Poland surrender a piece of land called the Polish Corridor to Germany. This was a piece of land taken from Germany after World War I during the Treaty of Versailles and given to Poland. The people who live there are a mix of Poles and Germans, and it was a way to give Poland one major seaport, the city of Danzig. However, many of the people living there were German. This gave Hitler and Nazi Germany claims that this constituted German Irredenta, land where Germans lived that was not part of the German nation state, and Hitler demands that this piece of land be taken away from Poland and given to Germany. Britain and France no longer trust Hitler after the failure of the Munich Pact, after he'd taken Austria and Czechoslovakia and the Sudetenland, and so rather than urge Poland to give in, as they had done to Czechoslovakia, they urged Poland to stand firm and guarantee that they will not stand by any territorial adjustment between Poland and Germany. So on the morning of September 1st, 1939, a million-man German invasion of Poland begins, and the key to the German success are the new Blitzkrieg tactics, German for lightning war. The key is concentrating your tanks in German panzers and your air force in German the Luftwaffe, and you use your air force and your artillery to hammer enemy weak spots, hammer their communications, their headquarters, supply lines, and then you concentrate your tanks. You don't need necessarily more of them. You don't need necessarily the biggest ones, but you concentrate your tanks into key weakened sectors, and you break through, encircle, and you force to surrender enemy troops as they cannot get resupply of food, ammunition, or communications, and they are forced to surrender. Using this, they meet with remarkable success in the invasion of Poland, something that would shock everyone who was used to World War I and the trench warfare and the slogging style of war that had dominated World War I, that was seemingly gone in the first week of World War II. In retaliation for this, Britain and France declare war on Germany in defense of Poland. The war against Poland lasts 2 major weeks as the Poles try to defend heroically but hopelessly, even more hopelessly when the Soviet Union attacks Poland from the rear. After 2 weeks of viciously defending, heroically defending against the vicious German attack, they're now attacked from the rear. But before surrendering, the capital of Poland, Warsaw, holds out, and the Germans unleash the Luftwaffe, the Stuka dive bombers of the German Air Force, to rain bombs down on the capital city. They lose, power and gas and water and food shortages, and all order breaks down. They refuse to surrender for 2 weeks. Until, seeing no more hope, the capital surrenders after being nearly very, very much destroyed. The entire war lasts about a month total, but some in Poland refuse to accept total defeat, and they're able to get to the sea and able to get to England and set up a government in exile in London that agrees to somehow, some way, fight on. In the meantime, in the West, the newspapers blow up with "this is war, it's a World War II, it's another great war," and then nothing happens. They begin calling it the phony war, that they're at war with Germany, but there's nothing going on. there's so much written about the German blitzkrieg into Poland, but then nothing happens against France. And so the media joke that it's a sitzkrieg, that the Germans and French are just sitting opposite the sides of the border, not attacking one another for months and months. Let's explain why. The French had constructed a remarkable defensive structure. We said in the World War I unit how the Hindenburg Line was the Taj Mahal of trenches, that it was the most remarkable trench defense line the world had seen. Well, this French Maginot Line that they constructed in between the wars, this had elevators, this had subways, this had concrete underground bunkers with electricity and water, and they built this entire defensive network across the entire border with Germany. You want to talk about building a wall between two countries? This was a wall. And so, remarkable extent of its construction, remarkable cost. The strategy was World War I, anyone who attacked, you were foolish, and it was very hard to make a successful attack. Therefore, France would save its territory and treasure and lives by fighting a defensive war no matter what. Well, that gave them absolutely no ability to help Poland defend itself, as the French army sat behind its invincible Maginot Line. It could be said that in 1939, France was the country most prepared to fight and to win World War I. Only trouble is, it's not World War I anymore. They're in great shape to fight World War I, but that's not the era they're in. So for months, they sit behind their trenches of the Maginot Line. Media call it the phony war. They seem to do nothing. And then in 1940, we will see the fall of France and the Battle of Britain. In the spring of 1940, Hitler unleashes blitzkrieg onto the West, attacking attacking neutral countries not at all connected to France. Denmark, landing paratroopers on the island capital of Copenhagen and taking them entirely by surprise. They thought they were neutral bystanders. Invading Norway, and Britain landed some troops to try to help Norway, but it was no use. The Germans crossed the Baltic and landed paratroopers and took Norway. They take over the Netherlands. And then finally, the blitzkrieg hits into Belgium. Now the French, again, were prepared for World War I. So the minute the Germans invade Belgium, the French and the British plunge their armies deep into the northern part of Belgium to prevent a Schlieffen-style attack from catching them by surprise again. But as if by the worst luck in the world, the Nazis, rather than schlieffing all the way to the north through Belgium, cut just above the Maginot Line through the densely forested Ardennes region of France and Belgium, and they still emerge not only behind the Maginot Line, but now behind the major French and British army. They do this by the concentrated use of their tanks, by combining air power and paratroopers and tanks and concentrated infantry and artillery being pulled or hauled with trucks. And they emerge behind the Allied forces. It's a disaster. And the British are pressed up against the ocean at Dunkirk. And over the course of a couple of weeks leading up to the evacuation, the British are trapped. And the British decide to evacuate all of their troops from Dunkirk back to Britain. They call for all sorts of volunteers, practically anyone with a rowboat, to help save the lives of British troops. They leave behind their equipment, their tanks, their machine guns, and they save almost all the British men. No such rescue would be coming for the French army, which their Maginot Line was outflanked and useless. Paris is declared a free city, meaning unlike Warsaw, when the world saw how devastated the Polish capital was by the fierce German aerial attack, when they realized that Paris would soon be surrounded, they evacuated Paris of both the military and the government entirely, meaning that when the Germans arrived, no shots or bombs would be fired in anger at Paris and risk destroying that city's many treasures. Hoping to avoid the fate that the Polish capital suffered. But the French surrender lasted little longer than the Polish one did, and effectively in 6 weeks. Northern France had all been occupied. They allow southern France to set up its own semi-independent government called Vichy France. And Vichy France would be run by the famous World War I hero Marshal Pétain, who had been the hero of Verdun. He would earn infamy for cooperating with the Nazis as a collaborator by agreeing to run southern Vichy France for them. However, there was another option. Some of the French merely surrendered, some cooperated. Some joined with relatively young General Charles de Gaulle and his government in exile called the Free French. They refused to surrender, refused to stand down, and they would continue to, they moved to England to continue the war at a later date. Britain alone stands against Nazi Germany at this point. Hitler has conquered Europe. The Blitzkrieg seems unstoppable. It brings up the question, why didn't Hitler win? He's allied with Soviet Union. He's conquered so many other neutral countries. He's allied with Italy. Britain stands alone. The United States is isolationist. The key reason is he made crippling mistakes. It was certainly within his power, within the power of someone who had a more rational approach. But he certainly was within striking distance of defeating all that stood against him. But the British do not surrender. Hitler ultimately had almost no plans of a war of conquest against England. Hitler really believed in a lot of his racial ideology that meant he wanted war of conquest against the East, the Slavs, the communists, the Jews, and the British racially are very similar to the Germans. They're, Anglo-Saxons, and, English has a very Germanic roots. And so he really did not have as much intent or desire. His racial ideology superseded his strategic competence to try to win the war. And the British do not surrender. They do not negotiate. The government of Neville Chamberlain falls, and you have the rise of Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who has the same impact or greater impact on Britain as FDR's fireside chats did during the Great Depression. Churchill really rallied the British people to the occasion, famously stating the full quote of "We shall never, 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 never surrender." And so Hitler was forced, against his racial motivations, to try to defeat Britain through military conquest when they would not surrender or negotiate. And so in order to invade Britain by sea, the Germans would never match the British Navy. But what World War II would prove is that air power could defeat sea power. So if Germany could obtain aerial dominance over Britain, they would be able to safely cross the ocean, cross the English Channel, and perhaps invade Britain if they had air power, because it would take too long and too much expense to ever try to catch up to the British in sea power, but they might be able to do it in air power. So they launch a massive aerial war over Britain as the preparation for a possible later invasion. And the Battle of Britain in mid-1940 is where we'll pick up next time. Thanks for watching.